This is the Zhiyun Weebil 2, and it brings a lot of new features and tweaks to its already very unique design that we've seen with its previous models. Probably most important this year, it brings a pretty substantial payload boost to which it can actually support larger setups like the Sony a7S III with the 24-70 Sigma lens that's actually filming us right now. Oddly though, Zhiyun doesn't actually officially state its max payload anywhere on its site or any of its official documentation as far as I could find. According to B&H and a lot of other camera sites, it states that it's 7.3 pounds, whereas for some reason on a couple other reviews and sites, they state 8.8 pounds. I'm not entirely sure why there's that distinct 1.5 pounds, but something to note there. In general, B&H is relatively accurate, so we're gonna go with that. And so while previous models generally would struggle with most a7S III setups, especially anything that isn't really a prime lens, this actually handles that 24-70 like I was mentioning, even at 70mm. With that being a pretty common setup for a lot of people, this is going to be a gimbal that's going to work for most of their needs. And so for the money, this might be one of the best value gimbals at its size that supports a payload that high. And as I'll share with you, it can actually keep up relatively well compared to other gimbals that are larger and can support higher payloads. Now, before I tell you about how well this gimbal performed and some of the quirks I was able to find while using it, these are the kind of shots that you can get with it with its different modes. So funny enough, while I was actually using this to film a commercial for the Indurax canvas backpack, which I talked about in a previous video, two interesting things happened. One, I was approached randomly by this guy that asked me to film his proposal, and that was kind of cool. So I was actually able to get a couple shots testing that out. Then after that, I and the couple was actually approached by 𝗟𝗲𝗿𝘀𝗀, who, if you don't know, is from the Drew Carey Show and a bunch of other comedies like that. Got to talk to him about it, talked about gear a little bit. I think he had like his DP and a couple other of his TV show buddies with him there. So that was awesome. But the biggest thing about this is actually really how small it is. And as I'll kind of be doing throughout this video, I'll be giving you a bit of a comparison between this and the DJI RS2, which is my go-to gimbal for a lot of my filming. I'll save like a more in-depth comparison and head-to-head where I kind of show different video examples of them shooting the same thing with the same setups in a later video. The focus is going to be on the Zhiyun right now. But just for the purposes of getting this out of the way, one of the things that's like really important to me, and one of the reasons I previously did not use gimbals a lot, especially for my previous shoots, unless I really needed to, is the fact that they were very much not compact. And one of the nice things about new gimbals right now is they actually found a way, and I don't know how they couldn't do this before, their arms actually can lock off into a compact and more manageable shape. The other thing is that they didn't break down any further. These both have the ability to take off their feet as well. At first sight, Zhiyun is the smaller gimbal, and in many ways it is. So if I was just to put these both in a backpack like this, obviously the Zhiyun is much more manageable. But the Ronin actually has a trick up its sleeve where I can actually further break it down by taking off its battery grip. But now if you're working with an even smaller space or compartment in a bag, for example, the RS2 is probably going to be much easier to pack. Now, the reason I want to bring that up really early is I know that's one of the appeals to this gimbal, and choosing between the two, if you're really concerned about the ultimate small gimbal as far as breaking it down the most, this isn't necessarily going to be it just because it doesn't have the removable handle. But on the other hand, where I think this still can be considered the more compact gimbal, if you want to use this in a more run and gun style where you can just throw this in your bag and pull it out really quickly, then this still is going to be the more compact choice. Now, one of the reasons I got the RS2, even though there were other gimbals that supported the A7S III with the 24 to 70 mil, I wouldn't be pushing it to its limits. It can hold my camera, it can hold larger cameras and lenses. So if I ever did need to put on a larger lens, or if I wanted to add additional gear to the camera, for example, lights or microphones, I knew it would be able to support all the additional gear. Now with the Zhiyun, again, we're talking about 7.3 pounds, most likely. The Sony A7S III with the 24 to 70, it handles that setup pretty well for the most part. So if that's all you're ever gonna need and you don't plan to add additional gear, that's fine. The only thing to note is you are at its upper limit. Something that was surprising though is when using this in POV mode, I think it held up really well even with the lens at 70 mil. Where it did struggle a little bit though, and I think some others have agreed with this, is when you're in undersling mode and you're moving at faster speeds or you're panning or whipping really quickly, it tends to struggle a little bit more. I also noticed that the motor does have a little bit more shake. Like I could definitely tell it was struggling under that weight. Even though your gear or setup fits within the payload that the gimbals advertise, there are certain modes or movements that are going to be adding extra stress that will perhaps exceed that. But that again is why you might prefer to have a larger gimbal, just so again you can have that extra cushion. Something that does work really well, and in general, if you're going to be working with zoom lenses like the 24 to 70, I recommend balancing the gimbal at about 50 mil. So that way, if you decide to do a lot of adjustments to your zoom range on the fly, you don't really have to rebalance the gimbal. Because even though you can balance the gimbal at 70 mil or 24 mil and it'll still work when you switch between your zoom range, you're putting more overall stress when you go to the other extreme versus if you balance it in the middle. Overall, the motors don't have to work as hard. And just like most other gimbals right now, setup and balancing is pretty straightforward. They all kind of follow the same general steps. Something that is cool, and it's great to see that most new gimbals are including this now, is that they have the locking switches so that you can actually lock off the gimbal. So whether it's, again, transporting it, or if you have a camera attached here and you're just moving between one location to another, it just keeps all your gear a lot more secure and prevents it from just swinging around. Something I would like to see, however, implementation to the RS2, where it has a micro fine adjustment knob for the Manfrotto 501 quick release plate. Even when you're balancing this Zhiyun on the flat surface, the quick release plate can slide really easily if you're not careful. When I'm doing this in a more quick and dirty way and I'm just trying to basically bounce this on my knee or something, or get this close enough to just work really quickly, a fine adjustment knob actually goes a long way in my opinion. The other thing that's actually cool, you don't actually have to remove the Manfrotto plate. You can actually add a quick release plate here for the camera, which is just a far easier way to attach and remove the camera. That way you don't have to rebalance each time you remove the quick release plate. Granted, again, this is a relatively more expensive gimbal and not necessarily in the same class as the Zhiyun, but it's worth mentioning because people with similar cameras and lenses are more than likely going to be comparing these gimbals in terms of purchasing them. And again, they both have the ability to carry that same setup, so it's worth considering the two. Now, compared to the previous Weebill models, this has a lot more clearance, especially from the back, for your larger cameras. With this unique design and having this motor further down, it actually allows for a camera to sit much further back and still be able to spin freely. I know some of the earlier ones had an issue where, especially with those larger setups, you would frequently bump into this back motor here. Of course, one of the unique things about the Weebill is its sling design, being able to throw on that tripod arm to allow you to enter underslung mode is really cool. Even when I'm not shooting underslung, I actually really prefer to hold the camera and to actually have the arm up here. I feel it gives me better support. And if one arm ever gets tired, as opposed to kind of doing this switch over here, I think it actually helps distribute the weight a little bit better too. It's easier to just keep one hand where it is and just release the one that's a little bit tired. Overall, the build quality feels really good. I really like the soft grip here. This feels really nice. Even though I know this is still probably all plastic for the most part. It feels like a higher quality plastic. I know there's some metals around here too. Even your buttons, your joystick, and your knobs all feel pretty good. Nothing feels loose or jiggly. So speaking of those buttons, they've all been moved to the side. First, you've got the power button, which when you hold it, it actually lights up this bar here, which also doubles as a battery life indicator. You've also got the joystick, and you'll notice it's kind of angled outwards a little bit towards the front, which allows you to use your thumb and control the movement of the gimbal really easily. Even when you're holding it at these more awkward angles, because of the way it tilts outwards, I can still get my thumb reached around there. Your other buttons though, like your record button, are a little bit more awkward to reach at these angles. You've also got your 3 mode selectors on the left-hand side as well. These definitely are very tricky to do one-handed. I would actually hold it and then switch with my left hand. The wheel's really cool. I feel like you can get really precise adjustments here. This can be programmed to adjust your ISO, your shutter speed, your roll, or your aperture. I personally have this set to roll because I usually control all the other settings or block them off just in the camera itself, so I don't really need to make any adjustments on the gimbal. If you get and install the optional follow focus kit as well, you can use that to control the focus. It's unique that you have all your buttons on the side here, but compared to more traditional setups where you have everything on the back, where if you're a left-handed user, it's probably going to be a lot easier. This, on the other hand, is definitely designed for more right-dominant users or someone that's willing to use their left hand for just the controls. All right, on to the screen. Now, this is obviously one of the biggest talking points. You have this big touch screen here, and it's actually really nice for the most part. Yes, it's a great feature, but I don't think it should be the main reason you either upgrade from previous models or choose this compared to all the other options out there. So having a nice big flip out screen is really cool for changing all your settings, seeing what mode you're in, and making fine adjustments. Also, if you have the video transmitter kit, which shows what your camera sees, you have the ability to see that right on the screen here, and that's really nice. I have a similar kit for my RS2, and with its smaller screen there, especially when you're trying to drag your focus point on an object or subject, it can actually get a little bit difficult to see what's going on. When it flips out, you have a couple angle adjustment points, but you're a little bit limited. I also think that if it articulated a little bit further back for some of those more awkward angles that you might be filming at, it might be a little bit better. I bet they probably intended to limit that just so you don't try to flip it closed with the screen facing upwards. So they wanted to make it very clear that users should not be doing that. Surprisingly, even in direct sunlight, I could see it really well. It definitely gets really bright. In terms of the quality though, I'm a little bit concerned. After my first day of using it, I noticed my first scuff on it, and I'm relatively careful with my gear. Like I'm pretty sure I did not physically like scrape this like myself. More than likely, it actually came from it closing. I'm not entirely sure why they made this grooved like that. If you use this outdoors or in other environments where there's other debris, as if this groove ever gets anything that's coarse or rough, it's going to definitely scuff this screen up really quickly. Another concern with this design, the fact that it's a separate screen on the side here. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when you're just lost in what you're filming, you're not entirely aware of your surroundings. I think if you bump into this with some force, this is definitely gonna come off. I typically, when I'm not adjusting a setting, because like I said, I don't have the ability to live preview my video right on here. So I don't really need to have it open and in the way all the time. So both for protecting it as well as for conserving battery, I flip it inside, because you gotta imagine a bright screen like that under full brightness, it's gonna be consuming a good amount of battery. And so speaking of battery life, this is rated for like 9.5 hours. Of course, your results are gonna heavily vary based on how you're using this, as well as the weight and size of your payload. So if the gimbal's motors are being stressed out more, of course, that's going to consume a lot more battery. Generally, I think 9 hours is good enough for most people. The other option, of course, if you do need to either top it off or it's low or you need to charge it up really quickly, it has USB-C and it supports quick charging up to 24 watts, which is really awesome. Can get a full charge in about an hour and a half. In general, with all my gear, my biggest suggestion for anyone is to actually carry around a power bank, which can support quick charging for multiple devices over USB-C. So if I were to kind of sum up my experience using this is a very compact gimbal. It's relatively light. And more importantly, it actually can support larger setups like the Sony a7S III with larger lenses like the Sigma 24 to 70mm. So if either you're looking for a very capable gimbal that's very compact, this is a great choice for that. The flip out screen is cool in a lot of ways. You just need to be careful about it and be mindful that it can potentially get scuffed or possibly break. The underslung mode is one of the unique things, and being able to actually attach a handle up here and carry it like that allows you to get some cool movements, as well as makes it a lot easier to just use in general because of that weight distribution we were talking about. I think compared to the more expensive and larger gimbals like my RS2, in a lot of ways it can keep up pretty well, provided that, again, you know that you're kind of at the upper limit of what this gimbal can do. And so if you either plan to upgrade to a larger camera or lens, you probably are not going to be able to do so with this. Likewise, you can't add additional attachments like microphones and lights to it very easily without overloading it. Likewise, even just using that base setup, certain movements could potentially be more straining on the motors compared to something that supports and has that higher threshold. It's going to work better with that. But in terms of size, cost, and capabilities, I think it's a good mix and good value for that reason. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I plan to do a bit more of a head-to-head comparison between the two gimbals in case you're interested in the various ways where one kind of outshines the other. So if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe if you haven't, just so you can stay tuned for when that's going to come out. And aside from that, I do put out a lot of other tech and camera related reviews and comparisons on the channel, so you can find that too. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.